And then the last thing that I've, in starting to explore this a lot more is that I've been frustrated that there's this lack of methodology for it. Just these things are presented as this sort of giant spray of patterns without, some loose categorization at best. So that's what, in thinking about, I've sort of come, what's come to be known as atomic design, is trying to establish sort of a methodology for crafting an effective interface design system. And so as I was looking for other parallels, I'm like, surely other people have had this problem before, and this is around, this isn't totally new. So this is a weird slide. I'll just let you soak it in real quick. Take a drink of water. Actually, no, I won't. So my high school chemistry teacher, I couldn't find a picture of him, but he looked a lot like Wilford Brimley, so that's why that's there. But it was actually one of the hardest classes I ever had in high school, but we did all these sort of balancing chemical equations and creating these chemical compounds and things like that, and I just loved it. I really latched onto it. And so that's sort of what I started looking into for inspiration, because in the natural world, we have these basic building blocks of all matter, right? Hydrogen and oxygen, these atomic elements, right? They have their own unique properties. They can't be broken down any further without losing their meaning. Those atoms come together, right, bind together to form molecules, right, like a water molecule. Now all of a sudden this water molecule has its own properties. Those molecules keep combining together to form more complex molecules. Those molecules keep combining together to form sort of simple organisms, right, which keep combining together to form more complex organisms, like a person. This is, if you do Google search for people, this guy came up and I was like, yeah, that's pretty accurate. That's going in the presentation. Dude in beret and drop shadow. This just sort of really encapsulates people. So, but yeah, again, like all matter, I kept him in there, all matter in the known universe is comprised of this finite set of atomic elements. That's beautiful, really. And as it turns out, that we have that too in the web. So this guy named Josh Duck put together the periodic table of HTML elements. Pretty clever, right? Here's all of your inputs, your form elements. Here's all of your different table elements, all of your different sort of text elements and things like that. And so what that means is that we could sort of apply that same process that happens in the natural world to our interfaces. So that's what atomic design is it's this sort of step, this sort of 5 distinct steps that all sort of happen concurrently, right? It's not like step 1, start with atoms, step 2, eventually build up to the, no, it's all sort of, it's more a mental model than anything else, but it's these 5 sort of distinct steps for crafting an effective interface design system. So we'll start with atoms. Again, sort of coming back to this idea that these atoms have their own unique properties. They're all sort of different. They can't be broken down any further. We have things like labels and inputs and buttons, right? These things can't be broken down. They're all different, but they're sort of useless on their own, right? So at this molecule level, we take these atoms, right? You click the button, it doesn't really do anything because it's just a button floating in space. And now all of a sudden we combine them, right? To form a search form molecule, right? So this label now all of a sudden means something. It's now, associated with this input. And clicking that button now submits that search form. So now we have this little tiny chunk of interface, this little tiny chunk of functionality. And now we could take that molecule, that relatively simple component, and put it into context of a much larger organism. So this is the search form molecule, the primary navigation molecule, the logo atom, right? All comprise this sort of header organism. So these organisms are this sort of relatively complex chunk of interface, right? This sort of standalone piece of interface. And we see this we see this all the time, right? Any website we go to, it's, you're gonna see a header, right? And it's going to have a bunch of sort of disparate stuff that all comprise this sort of standalone chunk of interface. And some organisms might be comprised of things like a list and a form and an image and stuff like that. Or something like a tweet list organism, right, might be comprised of that same tweet molecule repeated over and over and over and over again. So much like in nature, where you could have like a molecule that's comprised of just carbon atoms, or you could have something that's comprised of different atoms. So here's where the analogy ends, mostly to help clients recognize and realize that you're not insane. Trust me, I tried. So now we sort of wade into waters that are more familiar for actually sort of building a web product, which yeah, people appreciate that. So we have these sort of relatively complex organisms, right? These sort of standalone chunks, and now we could actually put it into the context of something that resembles a web page. But at this template level, the real focus here is on the content structure, right? The underlying content structure. Rather than, this isn't the final website, right? This isn't the final actualization of the website. This is more focused on things like, what are our image sizes? What are our character lengths? And Sammy mentioned in the last presentation this concept of being content first, right? Doesn't mean taking it to extremes and saying, we're going to sit on our hands, client, until you give us the final copy deck and you give us the final, the final images and the final videos and things like that. It's about knowing what your content structure is, right? If you're making an e-commerce site, you know generally you're going to have some product information, you're going to have a price, you're going to have a checkout form, things like that. And that's more than enough to get started with. So at this template level, again, what we're doing is we're focusing on sort of the skeletal content structure. And then it's whenever we take this to the page level, so we take these templates, what we do at the page level is actually pour in real representative content into those templates. And now this is obviously an important step because, one, this is what your end users are going to see. This is what your clients are going to approve. But really, this step is so incredibly important because this is where you validate or invalidate the decisions that have made in your design system. Right? Does this design pattern hold up if we put in a headline that's 400 characters long? Right? Yes or no? And if it doesn't hold up, then maybe we need to go back through and tweak things at a more atomic level. It's also at this page level that we could actually test variations of the same template. So for example, you might need to demonstrate and articulate what a blog post looks like whenever there's 0 comments, right after it gets published. And then the client also wants to see what it looks like with 100 comments and threaded comments. And it's all still the same template, but they're variations of the same thing, right? What does a homepage look like normally? And then what does a homepage look like whenever there's an emergency and they have a big banner on the top? Again, same fundamental structure, but with some slight tweaks. So that's atomic design. It's these sort of 5, again, very distinct steps that traverse between abstract and concrete. And this is, I think, the major advantage of sort of working in this way is that whenever you need to talk about something and really sort of get down and break things apart and really hone in on one aspect of the design, you can do so. And if you need to see it in context, right, you can do that as well. I found it, and I've been working this way for a year and a half. Year and a half. And I found that, clients, quite frankly, don't give a shit about atoms and organisms and things like that. And that's fine, and you could sort of appreciate that. But that isn't to say that they shouldn't be exposed to this, right? What your clients need to understand is that you're not just creating this cluster of ad hoc pages, right, with no real underlying thought to it. What you're doing is you're establishing them a system that they can live with and grow with and for years to come. And so while, you're not going to sort of expose every button floating around in space to them, it's still tremendously important for them to understand. And lastly, the atoms, much like in nature, it's a little more conceptual. Things are so blown apart that you really don't get an idea of context and things like that. So atoms become more a reference, right? And what do my H2 styles look like, right? What do my block quotes look like? And on the flip side of that, on the other end of the spectrum, the pages are mostly there for review. The real building sort of happens in between. Again, you're sort of validating or invalidating your design decisions at that page level, right? That final form, and then sort of going through and solving things at a more structural level. This isn't really anything new. Again, people like Andy Clark have been talking about this stuff for years. This idea of, abstracting our designs and sort of breaking things down has been around for a long while. And there's a lot of other trends in other languages and areas and disciplines that are following suit. Things like CSS, BEM and OOCSS and SMACs that are all this idea of sort of creating modular CSS. But even things like YUI and jQuery UI have been around for ages, right? And it's all about sort of serving up these different components. But the main thing now is that it just matters a lot more now. And also atomic design sort of goes, I think, a couple steps further in certain areas. And one, making a big distinction between simple components, right, molecules and organisms, more complex components, and trying to do so in a thoughtful way. And then also that difference between templates and pages, right? It's sort of separating that the final form with the underlying content structure. So that is the sort of concept of this. So that's again, the philosophy. In order to actually implement it, I created a tool with a guy named Dave Olson, who's a web developer in the States, to actually execute this thing. So Pattern Lab is a tool. It's ultimately a static site generator that sort of stitches together and assembles these atomic design systems. And with its final goal sort of serving as that tiny bootstrap for every client, right? Sort of, it's become our main deliverable to our clients. It becomes the final production-ready front-end code. Other people use it for other things, for prototyping and things like that, and that's wonderful too. It provides some patterns to get started with, and it's a design toolkit, some other sort of things that we'll get into in a bit. What it isn't, though, is it's not Twitter Bootstrap, right? It doesn't give you the answers. You still have to do the work yourself. You still have to write your own code. You still have to style your buttons the way you see fit, the drop-downs the way you see fit, and things like that. It's not language, library, or style, or workflow dependent. So if you like using jQuery, cool, go for it. If you don't, that's fine too. Like Sass, cool, go for it. If you don't like it, fine, do something else. It's not going to judge you. It's also not incredibly rigid, so you could name things however you want. In fact, you could bulldoze the entire atomic design sort of methodology. Twitter's actually using this, and they call it elements and blocks and modules or something else. So, and that's fine. It's also not just a pattern library, but it's also not something you launch a website with. It's sort of this weird in-between state where yes, you're using it to create potentially final front-end code, but at the same time, it's not like a Jekyll type tool wherever you're going to sort of just put it up live to the world and that is your website. It still needs to be integrated with CMS or a bigger system. So this is what it looks like. Looks like shit. It's intentional. Again, the idea is like that you're supposed to swap in all of your own stuff, right? It's not about sort of using this stuff out of the box. But what it does give you is it gives you this nice sort of menu navigation that allows you to sort of traverse between, again, that abstract and concrete. And if we look at things, we have things like, color swatches, again, these very elemental aspects of the design, right? Your font families, even invisible things like animation defaults. Animation is this sort of invisible aspect of an interface, but at the same time, it needs to be consistent throughout as well, right? So we have all of these things, different headings, paragraphs, block quotes, inline text elements, pre-formatted text, bulleted lists, different image types, logos, hero images, square images, avatars, icon fonts, spinners, fav icons, form fields, things like that. Buttons, tables. And again, the idea is to replace this or build upon it, whatever your project needs. At the molecule level, here we're taking something that this is a pretty common interface pattern, image, headline, excerpt, right? Here's a variation of that pattern, right? So this would be a different molecule, right, where it's inset, laying over top, right? The way we're doing this is actually using a tool called Mustache, which is a templating engine. And what this allows us to do is this little greater than sign means include, right? And so it basically allows us to include patterns within other patterns. And so at this stage, I'm just including an atom called image landscape 4x3, and then I'm giving it some dynamic text, this headline short text. So, but this is the basic gist of Pattern Lab. It's just we're able to include something inside something else, and then as a result, we're able to include that block into something else, right? So it's essentially just nested includes, right? And the beauty of that is that if you make a change to that hero image size or that avatar or that whatever else it might be, right? You make that change once and it will propagate to wherever it's included, right? Contrast that to having a Photoshop document. One of my favorite stories is I was building a e-commerce site for Tiffany, the jewelry company, and the client said, we need our font size to be 1 point bigger. And a designer had to go through 75 PDFs, finding every instance of a text field. And just, talk about inefficient. So the organism level. So this is another site I'll talk about a little more for TechCrunch. And again, we have this sort of relatively complex standalone chunk of interface. If you crack open the hood, on this, what you see is a header, but I'm including the ad, I'm including the logo, I'm including the primary navigation, the search, and the social navigation. So that's what, those patterns comprise that header pattern. And now I could take that and include it into my templates, right? So whenever we get up to the template level, again, the focus here is content structure. So this is another site we did for Time Inc., the big magazine parent company, and Sports Illustrated and all that stuff. But you could see here at this template level, right, we're defining what our image sizes are, what our sort of character lengths are, and as you sort of scroll down, you could sort of see how this works, right, where it's all these sort of grayscale sort of placeholder things, and this is tremendously valuable to the team we are working with that's implementing this. In this case, it was in WordPress. This provides them the actual template to translate over into WordPress. And so here's what that looks like. And what we're doing here is we're giving these things little names, essentially. We're just calling this area hero, and we're including this molecule that we're calling hero video. We're giving this a name of experience, and that gives us a little hook. So now we could sort of take this idea and, again, sort of take it from this content structure into the real actual content. Just sort of show you this again, right? Here's our template, right? And actually now pour in real representative content. So We learned that everyone loves Beyonce. So if you're doing a site redesign, just include pictures of Beyonce, and it will get approval. I promise you. So you just swap in the Beyonce photos, but you could see, right, the same general content structure is there, but we've now replaced all that sort of grayscale stuff with real, actual representative content. And again, what that allows us to do is to sort of see how things are coming out, right? See how things look with real content in them. And the way that we're doing this is to show you this again. So we're giving these things names. And what we're doing is using JSON data, we're able to sort of just swap out those grayscale graphics, those sort of placeholder dynamic bits and pieces. So in our hero area, instead of lorem ipsum, it now says moving people. In our image, we're giving the name of hero full. There's our Beyonce JPEG, right? And as you go down to experience, you could see, all right, we're swapping this out with this image called Hero Skater, and giving it some alt text and giving them different titles. And what this is really great for doing is this actually abstracts this sort of separation between structure and data. Abstracts things. One, it serves as a wonderful blueprint for whoever's doing the back-end development, right? It's like, here's which bits are dynamic, here's which bits aren't. But what this also does, for the Time Inc. project at least, is actually frees me up to do more development work. Any web developers in here ever make a copy change? Right? Oh, you spelled that wrong. Right, I need you to go through and fix it. It's like death by a million paper cuts. Oh yeah, we got a new copy deck. Can you go in and sort of swap all this in? And because it's in code, of course, it's your responsibility to do that, right? That's a waste of a talented developer's time. So by sort of separating these things out, the other designers on our project were able to go through and sort of update the copy, which freed me up to do actual bug fixing and all that good stuff. So here's another example of this. This was for a product that I was working on, wherever, again, you have the same pattern. And what this allows you to do is to pour in a bunch of things. So I would, pour in a bunch of ridiculous names of different lengths to see how the pattern held up. Right? I'm sure some Finnish names would probably break this pattern, right? But that's the idea, right? So you solve that, you put in the longest name and you see if the pattern holds. And if it doesn't, then you go through and solve it at that more atomic level, right? So again, it gives you that opportunity to sort of validate things. Because in Photoshop, of course, every visual designer, people's name is Sarah without an H, right? It's like conveniently fits nicely onto one line always, right? And these sort of unrealistic best practice or best case scenarios. So that's the core of what Pattern Lab is this system to help us stitch together these atomic design systems. In addition to that, we also include a viewport resizer that's built into it. So this is the problem. Even with responsive design, we see stuff like this, in tutorials and in Final Code and stuff. We see, media queries, max width 320 pixels, right? Or an iPhone 4 in portrait view, right? 480 pixels, an iPhone 4 in landscape view. 768 pixels, an iPad in portrait view, right? 1024 pixels, or an iPad in landscape view, or a desktop browser, right? The fold. Oh God, the fold. A miserable sort of conversation that always happens. But at the same time, it is now our responsibility to make interfaces that look and work beautifully no matter what resolution screen you're on, right? So I have a tool called Ish, and we bake that into Pattern Lab. And basically what that does is as you click on small, it gives you a small-ish viewport. You click on medium, it gives you a medium-ish viewport. And it changes every time. It's like a range. And this is less useful as a developer tool. This has everything to do with being a client and team education tool. This is helping break the mold of the iPhone view or the iPad view, because as we know, the landscape is a lot more diverse. Even in the iPhone world, right? Whenever the iPhone 6 came out and 6S, it's like, well, there goes all that, right? And I'm just quietly laughing in the background. Told you so, assholes. But so it is now, again, this has everything to do with sort of educating our clients and helping abstract this notion of getting out of thinking in terms of devices or even in terms of three little buckets that we put our stuff into, right? It also includes a little pixel to M converter, which is quite nice, and you could resize the browser. So even if you did need to put in 768, you could still do that. And then the client favorite, disco mode. You turn this on, and they're like, oh, look at it go. This is amazing. And it just jumps it around like crazy. And again, like, not terribly practical, but at the same time, it really does wonders for articulating what you're trying to accomplish with your design. And from a design standpoint, it actually does point out where that design might start looking a little gross, and maybe you need to go back in and sort of refine things. In addition to that, includes annotations. So annotations, are normally locked up in some 300-page PDF. Right? Does this sound familiar? I don't know if you guys work like this or not, but these wireframes and the annotations are like, call me Ishmael. It's like these book chapter long length annotations. Ultimately, those get thrown in the garbage can, right? And so what we're trying to do is really sort of bring a lot of that really good design thinking, all of the sort of decision making, and sort of bake it into the final interface. So with annotations, how that works is that you switch on annotations, and you could give any object an annotation. And whenever you click on it, it'll actually jump you through to the annotations. Right? And this appears in the sort of list view as well. So this is for Time Inc. We're showing what our color palette is. We're saying blah, blah, blah. Our fonts are being served up by Typekit, our animations. And again, it sort of gives some context. It gives some of that thinking and rolls that into our final deliverable. Another really huge feature of Pattern Lab is this concept of lineage. So again, most pattern libraries just show some patterns floating around in space, right? And you don't really get an idea of, well, where is this thing actually being used? And so with Pattern Lab, it actually will show you what patterns this thing consists of. In this case, the atom square. I'm using CSS to round the corners. So that's that little guy. And then it says that this guy, block media link, is what I'm calling this pattern, is included in the following areas, right? The profile navigation, the section media list, settings account, and account edit. So this is huge for determining, one, how global of a pattern this is, right? If you were to make a change to this thing, what pages do I need to test? What pages do I need to go back through in QA and make sure nothing broke, right? Is this dead, right? Are we not using this anywhere? Right, here's another example for a project I just finished up for the food bank in my home city, and it's the header, and it includes the atom, the logo atom, the search molecule, and the primary navigation, and it says it's included in the following patterns, and it lists like every single template because it's a global element, right? So there's a bunch of other stuff, code view, pattern status, media query display, and Dave's actually rewriting the whole thing now and sort of separating it so like mustache isn't a requirement. You could use whatever templating language you want. If it's handlebars or blade or some other thing, you can do that. But then also the opportunity to sort of develop plugins for it, which I'm pretty excited about. Back to, we were talking about performance budget earlier. We had one guy that hacked Pattern Lab to set it up for a performance budget, and that if the page went over the performance budget with the page speed index or file size, the entire header became bright red. So it's like keeping you freaking honest right there. That's really cool. But so that's the stuff that is coming on down the pipes. So worth noting, I should have probably said this at the beginning, that this isn't like a sales pitch for Pattern Lab. This is just like an open source project. We work on it in our free time, mostly Dave, which reminds me, if you do happen to use it and things go wrong, don't blame me, blame Dave. But seriously, like if you do happen to use it, we really like feedback and GitHub issues and things like that. How you guys doing? You all right? Okay, all right. You look good.